Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Soap Awards prediction series. I'm Helen Daly.
And I'm Lewis Knight.
As I'm sure you all know, the vote is now open for the radiotimes.com Soap Awards sponsored by Inspired Villages. And you can vote in 6 categories. Today we're going to go into the best category, the best villain, and discuss the runners and riders. The nominees are Todd Boyce, Coronation Street, Will Mellor, Coronation Street, Navin Chowdhury, EastEnders, Matt D'Angelo, EastEnders, Beth Cordingley, Emmerdale, James Chase, Emmerdale, David Ames, Hollyoaks. Lewis, as I said, this is my favourite category. I know I shouldn't be biased, but I love a soap villain.
Who doesn't love a soap villain? I feel like the villains are often the most iconic characters. I think they just bring so much to the soap. You wouldn't have any conflict often without a villain. Sometimes they can be very extreme, sometimes they can be everyday, and it can be equally impactful. And I think this category is chock-a-block with fantastic characters that make your blood boil, but also make you want to tune in and see what they do next.
It truly could go anywhere, I think, on this one. Let's start with Corrie. We've got completely different. We've got a serial killer in Stephen, and we've got Harvey, the gangster.
Yeah, I was going to say everybody loves a bad boy, but not quite a serial killer, Helen. But then I think Stephen is very enjoyable. He's like a comedic character in some ways, but he was also kind of like a fantastic, like, camp soap villain.
He's not your typical soap serial killer, right?
No, because I think you can obviously veer into just like completely dark and sinister, but I think he was kind of like oddly rootable, like because he was often so frustrated with how his lot was going and how everything seemed to be going wrong for him. It was like he was taking these like desperate stabs in the dark to try and have his life go right. But obviously he kept doing the worst thing possible, and it just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled to an inevitably chaotic conclusion, which I think was befitting of the character's chaos.
Also to a really epic conclusion. That episode, you saw everything. You saw the terror of Stephen, the bumbling nature of Stephen, but also you saw a different side to him. You saw a really emotional and really actually pitiful side to the villain.
Yeah, and I think what was great about that storyline winding up was that they brought in all of those characters that were so integral to him and his story. Like, it came back to his relationship with Audrey, which was obviously what brought him to the street in the first place. His relationship with the other Platts, also his relationship with Jenny, which had been kind of going on for quite some time, really, with their kind of like romantic relationship. So the fact that it kind of all came to a head with those individuals in close proximity was like expertly done as a soap. I think it kind of brought it together, all of those strands for his exit, which I thought was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to EastEnders, very, very different again. Who's standing out to you there?
I mean, it's really hard. 2 absolutely awful men, I think, is safe to say. Absolutely terrible. There's no wonder I think those 2 were often at the top of everyone's list for the 6 to bump off at Christmas. You got Nish, his relationship with Suki. Again, quite an oddly pitiful character, because in some ways he comes off as a bit kind of like pathetic or oddly comical because he's posturing so much to everybody to try and prove he's this, this alpha male. And a lot of the time it kind of falls down, but then he takes out all of his frustrations on Suki, who we've seen have to kind of come to terms with her sexuality, but he's been so controlling and abusive towards his sons especially as well. Like, his relationships with Ravi and Vinny have been really interesting and textured to watch as well. But there's something just like, oddly likeable about him. I think he's like quite a fun villain despite being so despicable, which is an interesting thing to say. But then Dean is
the other side, right?
Oh my God.
You'd love to hate him, right?
I mean, like, again, there's something oddly fascinating. Like, I think the psychology of the character, I think because we saw him going back to like the noughties as like this like happy-go-lucky, cheeky chappy kind of like in his late teens, early 20s.
A world away from what he is
now.
A
world away. And then with each of his stints, we've seen him transform into this absolute, like, the worst of the worst. Somebody who's willing to make his daughter, flirt with death just to try and keep her in the country and maintain a bit of control over her. Really quite sinister and dark stuff.
Yeah, and I think, again, 2 people that you didn't really know where they were going to go always. You're quite excited to watch them on screen. You're quite excited to see what they're going to do next. How much worse can they get? I think that's the making of a great soap villain.
Yeah, because you keep anticipating, they must have their comeuppance soon. And then it goes further, and you're like, oh God, there's another twist to this. Like, where is it? When are they going to get punished? And then the fact that it's kind of like ongoing, and you don't know what turn it will take. And sometimes they do get punishment, but then they will come bouncing back, which I think is another good sign of a soap villain.
And it keeps us coming back.
Yeah, because then we're like, oh no, what have they got planned next? Revenge is always interesting to watch in the soap.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to Emmerdale, 2 newcomers actually, which is really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think like Ruby, fantastic newcomer. She's brought a lot of spice, kind of a bit of poshness, a bit of glamour, but then also
a good rival for Kim Tae.
A fantastic rival
We'd
for
love
Kim
to see
Tae.
it.
But also her relationship with Caleb is so textured. It's very like Burton and Taylor. It's on, it's off. They're scheming against each other. She hates the Dingles, so she's like, and obviously they're the first family of Emmerdale, so the fact that she's willing to go toe to toe with the likes of Kane makes her
You don't mess with Kane.
No, she's a fantastic antagonist, but she's a schemer as well. So we never quite know where we stand with her. Like, what's she got up her sleeve next? She's just been like a real.
And she's
fun watch.
really nuanced as well. I mean, like, fantastically portrayed.
Yeah, I think Beth Cordingley has been a real asset to the soap. She's probably I would argue, one of their best newcomers in years.
Agreed.
I think she's been really strong.
And obviously the Tom and Belle storyline, we've touched upon it elsewhere in the video series. The domestic abuse storyline is very, very powerful. And to do that, you've got to have an incredible actor at the helm.
Yeah, I think James Chase has really mastered, again, that kind of everyday understated villain, because he just seemed like such a nice chap that Belle's managed to kind of end up with. And you're like, oh, this is quite a nice staid romance, quite sweet.
And you want to see Belle happy. We've grown up with her.
Yeah, and like even like before Christmas with the proposal and everything, it was all quite romantic. I know we'd had like an instant where we had a flash of anger, which was a bit unsettling to viewers, and they kind of wondered where that was going to go next. But again, it kind of seemed to be left for a while, and it just seemed to be easy to be swept along with the romance with Belle. And now we're seeing the full extent of how like monstrous he is in a way that again is behind closed doors, which is such a strong storyline for soaps to always to tell. I think because domestic abuse does so widely affect people, and lots of people have been touched by it, whether directly or indirectly. And I think to manage to actually judge that just right, to be that everyday villain, is like a real credit to Emmerdale, I think.
And really powerfully shown in the dinner party episode as well. You've got Rona and Marlon really kicking off at each other, and you just see Tom and Belle look at each other, and you know what that look means. And I think that is really, really powerful, actually, to establish that abusive relationship that just a look leaves you with an unease.
Yeah, that dynamic has been very well stage managed, I think, by Emmerdale. They've really made that strong. And again, we've said it before as well, the build-up of storylines over a long period of time, that one has been slow and steady for the last few months. And I think it's really gripping viewers and keeping them really kind of glued to see what happens next, and hope that Belle gets out of it sooner rather than later.
Definitely. And last but not least, Hollyoaks as well, another fantastic year of villains.
We've got a real hard issue-based storyline, and for Hollyoaks with David Ames as Carter, because that gay conversion therapy storyline is very hard-hitting. But again, Hollyoaks pushing boundaries. It's not the typical storyline you see in a soap, and I think they've managed to again maintain that line of gripping television, but also really tapping into a very sensitive subject matter. And I think his performance was fantastic. I don't think the storyline would have worked without it.
No, 100%. If you're going to make a really powerful story like that work, it's got to be a strong performance. And David Ames has just knocked it out of the park completely.
Yeah, I think that's been a real highlight for the soap in the last year, has to be that storyline.
And I think it's safe to say that we can't have soap without villains. It's just essential. Who's your favourite villain from years gone by?
Oh, there's so many. I think of Richard Hillman in Corrie.
My absolute favourite, I have to
What
say.
a fantastic serial killer. The archetypal soap serial killer, if we could have a fantastic serial killer. Janine in EastEnders, Janine Butcher, what a schemer. I think she's my favourite soap schemer, I think, because how many husbands has she seen off? I mean, she's basically a serial killer.
I think what we're saying is this is quite a tough category to judge. I think there's some special standouts from perhaps Corrie and EastEnders, but really, Emmerdale, Hollyoaks, massive performances.
Yeah, some that are also currently playing out on screen as well, so it's hard to not be drawn to what we're currently seeing as well, because obviously soaps are so present. So we'll just remind viewers to always try and bear in mind the whole year, because there's so much to remember, but all strong contenders.
Absolutely. So again, what we're saying is vote. You need to get voting. The vote is open until the 10th of June, so plenty of time to still get your votes in. Make sure your favourite wins by visiting radiotimes.com soap awards right now.